9 years ago, my sister stole my fiancé. Our parents called it destiny. Tonight in Dallas, she slid her 10-year vow renewal invitation across the table. Get used to eating alone, she smirked. I just checked my watch. She had no idea her bragging husband was about to lose everything right here. The man walking in behind her was not my savior. He was here to confirm their decade-long charade was officially out of time. My name is Brianna Cook, and I am 34 years old. Tonight, the air conditioning inside the Oraline room feels sharper than usual, though perhaps that is just the company. The private dining room sits perched on the rooftop of one of the most unnecessarily extravagant hotels in Dallas, a place where people go not to eat, but to be observed eating. I arrived alone. I am wearing a tailored, charcoal silk slip dress and a sharp blazer, an outfit that whispers rather than screams. It is a deliberate choice, standing in stark contrast to the aggressive display occupying the rest of the circular booth. My family does not believe in subtlety, they believe in branding. Across from me sits my sister, Marin Cook. She is radiating a kind of manic, polished energy, wearing a gown that feels 2 degrees too formal for a Tuesday dinner. Even here, her smile is a weapon she has been sharpening since we were children. Right now, it is stretched wide, an unnatural, triumphant curve that does not quite reach her eyes. With perfectly manicured fingers, she pushes a heavy gold-embossed envelope across the pristine white tablecloth. The thick cardstock makes a soft, scraping sound as it comes to a halt right in front of my water glass. I do not need to open it. I know exactly what it is. It is the formal invitation to her 10-year vow renewal ceremony with Luke Mercer. Luke, who is currently sitting next to her, swirling his wine with feigned aristocratic boredom. Luke, who was my fiancé 9 years ago. I figured I would put you at the singles table, Brianna, Marin says. Her voice is pitched up, calibrated perfectly so the words carry over the low hum of jazz to the adjacent tables. She wants an audience. She always wants an audience. I just thought it would be so much less awkward for you than sitting with the couples. You know, since you are coming alone, again. It is a classic Marin maneuver. She wraps cruelty in a thin veneer of sisterly concern, transforming her malice into public entertainment. A woman at the next table subtly shifts her gaze toward us, her fork hovering in the air. I do not touch the envelope. I do not even blink. I just let the silence stretch. Before the quiet can become a weapon against them, our mother, Sherry Cook, steps in to fill the void. She sighs, adjusting her diamond tennis bracelet, a piece of jewelry she makes sure to flash whenever she gestures. Oh, leave her be. Marin, you know how Brianna is. She is just good with paperwork, bad at life. You cannot expect everyone to have your natural charm. Exactly, our father, Dale, chimes in, nodding as he slices into his steak. Brianna has her little office job, but Marin knows how to live right. You have to know how to play the game. Brianna, you are too rigid. That is why you are sitting here by yourself while your sister is celebrating a decade of perfect marriage. A decade. The rounding up of their timeline is a convenient fiction they have all agreed upon, erasing the messy, overlapping months where Luke was still sleeping in my bed while secretly planning a future with my sister. I look at Luke. He is leaning back against the plush velvet upholstery, soaking in the adulation like a man parched. He looks exactly the same as he did 9 years ago, perhaps a little heavier around the jawline, his suit's custom cut now to hide the softness. He is enjoying this. He views my solitary presence as a monument to his own desirability, to punctuate his perceived dominance. He snaps his fingers at the sommelier. We will need another bottle, Luke declares, his voice booming with unearned authority. Bring us the Reserve Cabernet, the vintage 1996. And do not bother decanting it in the back. Do it right here at the table. He makes sure to say the year loud enough to ensure I understand the price tag attached to it. It is a bottle that costs roughly $4,000. It is a vulgar display of wealth, entirely unnecessary for the meal, ordered solely to establish a hierarchy. He wants me to feel small, to feel the crushing weight of the life I supposedly missed out on by losing him. They are all waiting for it, the predictable reaction. They expect my cheeks to flush with humiliation. They expect me to sharply push my chair back, perhaps knock over a water glass in my haste, and storm out of the restaurant in tears. They want the satisfaction of my retreat. They want the victim to play her assigned role. I do none of those things. I pick up my fork, spear a delicate piece of roasted asparagus, and take a slow, deliberate bite. I chew, I swallow, I take a sip of sparkling water. I look at each of them, my expression completely neutral, my heart rate holding steady at perhaps 60 beats per minute. The absence of my anger creates a sudden, suffocating vacuum at the table. Marin's smile falters for a fraction of a second. Luke stops swirling his wine. My mother glances nervously at my father. They do not know what to do with prey that refuses to run. The trap has been sprung, but the cage is empty. To cover the sudden discomfort, Luke clears his throat and aggressively steers the conversation back to his favorite subject, himself. "Speaking of living right," Luke says, leaning forward and adjusting his silk tie. "In just 3 weeks, the ink dries on my new contract. I am stepping into a massive executive role at Alderaan Hospitality Collective. Chief Growth Officer. They are handing me the keys to the kingdom. Brianna. We are talking equity, profit sharing, the whole 9 yards. It is a completely different stratosphere." He looks at me, desperate for a flicker of envy. I give him nothing. Marin, unable to let Luke hold the spotlight alone, immediately jumps in, her voice shrill with competitive pride. And that is just the beginning. With Luke's new connections at Alderaan, I am taking Marin House weddings regional. We are not just doing event planning anymore. We are building an empire. Total monopoly on luxury bridal experiences. We are absorbing smaller vendors, dictating the market. By this time next year, you will not be able to get married in a 300-mile radius without writing a check to my company. She taps her manicured nail against the gold-embossed invitation still sitting in front of me. That is why this vow renewal has to be the event of the season. It is not just about our love, Brianna. It is a statement. It is proof that we won. I look down at the heavy envelope. The intricate gold foil catches the dim candlelight of the Oraline room. I look at my sister, whose eyes are wide with a desperate, clawing need for validation. I look at my parents, who beam at the 2 frauds sitting across from them, entirely blinded by the illusion of success. And I look at Luke, a man whose entire existence is constructed on stolen credit and hollow arrogance. Slowly, deliberately, I pull back my left sleeve and glance at the face of my watch. It is 8:15 in the evening. They think my silence is a white flag. They think I am swallowing my pride because I have nothing left to fight with. They are wrong. I am not here to defend my honor. I do not need to raise my voice to demand an apology I will never receive. I am here because I already know the math. I know the exact structural integrity of the glass house they are currently throwing stones from. Tonight is not about me fighting back. Tonight is the night I sit perfectly still, drink my sparkling water, and watch as their magnificent 10-year mountain of lies finally catches fire and burns itself to the ground. To understand the anatomy of a lie, you first have to understand the architect who built the truth that came before it. 9 years ago, I was the architect of a life Luke Mercer claimed he desperately wanted. I did not just love him. I managed his entire existence. While he was busy having grand, formless ideas about becoming an entrepreneur, I was the one pulling double shifts to keep our shared checking account afloat. I spent over 80 hours meticulously researching and drafting his very first business plan. I swallowed my own ambitions, working 60-hour weeks at a corporate firm I despised. Also, I could quietly funnel $40,000 of my own salary into a high-yield savings account designated for our future home. I coordinated the caterers, I negotiated with the florists, and I booked the venue for a wedding that was supposed to be the beginning of our perfect, structured life, and Marin was merely the shadow in the periphery. She played the role of the comforting, older sister with flawless execution, Whenever the stress of funding Luke's dreams made me short-tempered or exhausted, Marin was there. She offered him a sympathetic ear, pouring him drinks on our patio while I was inside running budget projections late into the night. I thought she was acting as a buffer, easing the friction of a stressful engagement. I did not realize she was steadily laying the groundwork for a hostile takeover. The hostile takeover was not finalized in a boardroom, nor was it announced through a tearful, mature conversation about shifting feelings and broken promises. It happened exactly 3 weeks before I was supposed to walk down the aisle. It was a Sunday afternoon in late July, at my uncle's annual summer barbecue. I arrived 2 hours late, exhausted from a weekend meeting with a difficult client, carrying a store-bought pie because I had not had the time to bake. I walked through the side gate into the sweltering Texas heat, the sound of cicadas buzzing loudly in the background. I expected to find Luke holding a beer, chatting with my cousins. Instead, I found him standing near the edge of the patio, perfectly framed by the blooming hydrangeas. He was not alone. Marin was standing pressed against his side. His left hand, the hand that was supposed to bear my ring in 21 days, was resting firmly and possessively on the bare skin of her lower back. They were sharing a single plate of ribs, leaning into each other, laughing at some private joke. They were standing exactly the way a couple stands when they have absolutely nothing left to hide. They had the relaxed, sickeningly comfortable posture of two people who had been sleeping together for months. The betrayal was not a dull ache. It was a sharp, surgical slice straight through my sternum. It was so precise that for a few seconds, I could not even feel the bleeding. I dropped the pie. The aluminum tin hit the concrete patio with a loud, metallic clatter that silenced the entire yard. I looked at Luke, waiting for the panic, the guilt, the desperate scrambling of a man caught in the ultimate transgression. He just looked back at me, his expression hardening into a defensive glare. I turned my eyes to my parents, who were sitting just 10 feet away in their lawn chairs. I waited for the shock. I waited for my father to stand up and demand an explanation. I waited for my mother to rush to my side. They did neither. My father suddenly found his glass of iced tea fascinating, refusing to meet my gaze. My mother shifted uncomfortably in her seat, smoothing her floral skirt, before offering me a look that contained absolutely zero surprise and an agonizing amount of pity. They had known. The entire family had known, or at least suspected enough to look the other way, watching the train heading straight toward me without ever pulling the emergency brake. Before the sun even set that evening, my parents had completely rewritten the narrative of the betrayal to absolve their golden child. Instead of acknowledging the ugly truth that my sister had poached my fiancé, they spun a much more palatable, cruel fiction. "You have to understand, Brianna," my mother had whispered to me in the kitchen later that night, her voice dripping with toxic maternal wisdom. "You are just so rigid. You are always working, always calculating. You are too cold. A man needs warmth. A man needs to feel like he is the center of a woman's universe. Marin just knows how to make a man feel seen. She knows how to keep a man. You cannot blame Luke for seeking comfort when you are always so hard to love." Hard to love. Those 3 words dismantled my entire reality. In a single, suffocating night, I lost my fiancé, my standing within my own bloodline, and the naive, childish belief that the truth is a shield that defends itself. I realized that morality in my family was not based on right and wrong. It was based on whoever told the most entertaining story. Marin was the charming protagonist, and I was recast as the cold, unlovable antagonist who drove her man away. I did not scream. I did not throw plates against the wall. I did not beg Luke to reconsider, and I certainly did not demand an apology from a sister incapable of feeling remorse. 48 hours later, I packed everything I owned into a rented moving truck. I drove out of Dallas without looking in the rearview mirror. I did not block their numbers, because blocking them would imply they had the power to hurt me further. I simply let the silence grow thick and impenetrable between us. I took the absolute burning humiliation of that summer and swallowed it whole. I let it metabolize. I turned it into a brutal, unrelenting energy for survival. Over the next 9 years, I poured that energy into building something they could never touch. I founded Signal Arc Recovery. I started it from a cheap, wobbly folding table in a tiny apartment and grew it into a quiet, lethal predator in the corporate financial ecosystem. My firm specializes in tracking vendor fraud, executing complex loss restructuring, and dismantling businesses that are actively collapsing under the weight of their own deceit. When a massive corporation realizes millions of dollars are bleeding out through phantom invoices, shell companies, and fraudulent partners, they do not call the police first. They call me. I spend my days dissecting companies built on fake records, fake cash flow, and fake people. I peel back the layers of falsified tax returns and doctored bank statements to find the rot hiding underneath. My family never bothered to understand what I actually do. To them, corporate finance is boring. On the rare occasions my father sends the obligatory holiday text, he refers to my career as cleaning up paperwork garbage. They think I am a glorified bookkeeper, tucked away in a sterile cubicle, pushing pencils and hiding from the real world. They have absolutely no idea that my job is the exact manifestation of the trauma they inflicted upon me. Dissecting fraudulent people is my ultimate area of expertise. They taught me that people will lie right to your face while standing in your backyard. And because of that, I learned how to read the anatomy of a lie from the very first misplaced decimal point. I can spot a manipulated ledger or a forged signature with the same instinctual dread a prey animal feels when it smells a predator in the tall grass. So, as I sit here at the Oraline room, listening to Luke boast about his fabricated wealth and watching Marin parade her stolen life, I am not experiencing a resurgence of heartbreak. I do not care that he is holding her hand. I do not care about the vow renewal. The ghost of the man I loved died 9 years ago on a concrete patio. I did not fly back to Dallas and agree to this suffocating dinner because I am still wounded. I came back because, exactly 14 days ago, a highly encrypted monitoring software I used to protect my personal assets flagged a severe anomaly. Someone had reached into the dark and touched my legal identity. Someone bypassed layers of security to reactivate a dormant corporate filing attached to my name. A limited liability company I closed down nearly 7 years ago. Someone used my pristine, heavily guarded credit profile to secretly underwrite a massive, revolving commercial loan. It is a desperate, sloppy, and highly illegal maneuver. It is the kind of financial crime committed by someone who is drowning in debt and completely out of options. As I watch Luke aggressively demand a $4,000 bottle of wine he cannot afford, and as I watch Marin boast about an empire that does not exist, I know exactly who forged my signature. I know exactly what a rat smells like when it is cornered, and I am here to watch the trap snap shut. The waiter finally returns with the heavily overpriced Cabernet, pouring it with an agonizing slowness that Luke seems to interpret as a personal tribute. Once the glasses are filled, Luke leans forward, steepling his fingers on the table. He is ready to deliver his keynote address to an audience of one. Alderaan Hospitality is not just a management group. Brianna, Luke begins, using that deeply patronizing, hushed tone men adopt when they believe they are explaining the universe to a child. We are an acquisition vehicle. As Chief Growth Officer, my mandate is to aggressively identify distressed, high-value boutique wedding properties across the South. We buy them out, rebrand them, and turn them into iconic experiences for the global elite. We are talking about places where a basic weekend package starts at $250,000. Marin takes a delicate sip of her wine, her eyes gleaming with borrowed ambition. And that is where Marin House Wedding steps in to close the loop, she adds, her voice carrying a sharp, rehearsed cadence. We are no longer just a planning agency. We are transitioning into a fully integrated, ultra-premium lifestyle brand. We are absorbing the entire supply chain. In-house cinematic videography, custom dress design, imported floral architecture, even private aviation logistics for the bridal party. If a bride wants to fly her entire guest list to a private island, we own the jet charter contract. It is a closed-loop revenue model. They speak in the sterile, aggressive syntax of a venture capital pitch deck, entirely unaware of how transparently desperate they sound. Across the table, my parents are looking at them as if they have just split the atom. My father is practically vibrating with pride, while my mother rests her hand over her heart. Then, as if operating on a synchronized cue, Dale and Sherry turn their gaze toward me. The adoration vanishes, instantly replaced by a heavy, suffocating pity. It was the look people give when they have already decided someone is not worth helping. It is just incredible what they have built. My mother sighs, shaking her head. Real legacy wealth. It makes me sad that you are still just pushing files around. Sweetheart, you really need to start thinking about your long-term trajectory. Luke seizes the opening. He adopts an expression of deep, manufactured benevolence. Actually, Sherry, Marin and I were talking about that on the drive over. We want to help Brianna. He looks at me, his eyes wide with faux generosity. With the Alderaan merger and Marin House scaling up, we are drowning in vendor compliance files. It is tedious stuff. Insurance certificates, basic invoicing, making sure the florists have their liability waivers. We need someone who is used to sitting at a desk and organizing folders. I am prepared to offer you a position as our vendor records administrator. We will start you at $55,000 a year. It comes with basic health coverage. It would get you out of that dead-end situation you're in and give you a chance to stop pretending to be so busy. And, Marin chimes in, leaning across the table as if bestowing a knighthood, if you come on board and actually do a good job, I might even let you attend the vow renewal ceremony, not just sitting in the back, but as actual family, rather than an outsider. The sheer audacity of the offer is almost breathtaking. They were offering me a low-level admin job to manage the very supply chain I already knew was collapsing, presenting it as an act of profound familial charity. They want to pay me to organize the evidence of their own impending criminal indictments. I do not blink. I do not raise my voice. I simply fold my hands neatly in my lap. That is quite the portfolio. Luke, I say, keeping my tone perfectly flat, devoid of any measurable emotion. Alderaan is a massive entity. Tell me, has the formal letter of intent actually been executed for the flagship acquisition, the Belmere House property? Specifically, Luke's confident smile falters by a millimeter. He clearly did not expect a follow-up question. He expected gratitude, or at least a defensive argument. Well, obviously, Luke scoffs, adjusting his collar. The paperwork is in the final stages of synergistic alignment. We are just waiting on the legal team to finalize the deliverables. I see, I reply, my voice dropping to a calm, surgical whisper. And who exactly is the seller on the other side of the Belmere House paper? Because properties of that valuation usually have a mezzanine debt structure. Who holds the primary lien? Luke blinks. A faint sheen of sweat suddenly appears on his upper lip. It is a private holding group, he stammers, his voice losing its booming resonance. It is highly confidential, non-disclosure agreements. You understand. We are dealing with dynamic capital paradigms here. Brianna. You would not get it. I lean forward. Just an inch. I understand non-disclosure agreements perfectly. Luke, but if you are finalizing an acquisition, the closing cash flow has to be parked somewhere. Which escrow fund is handling the disbursement? Is it a Tier 1 national bank or a localized title firm? Luke opens his mouth, but nothing comes out for a long, agonizing second. He is drowning. He is frantically searching his mental database of corporate buzzwords, trying to assemble a sentence that sounds competent. We leverage a holistic, turnkey financial mechanism, Luke finally blurts out, the words tumbling over each other in a nonsensical rush. The capital is completely fluid. It is an optimized integration of assets. He sounded like a man repeating finance terms he did not actually understand. The silence at the table is no longer tense. It is humiliating. My father frowns, clearly confused by Luke's sudden inability to speak English. Marin, sensing her husband floundering, feels a sudden, venomous surge of protectiveness. She cannot stand the sight of me dismantling him with 3 simple questions. In her desperate rush to inflict pain, to prove that they are superior and I am nothing, she loses her grip on the script. You do not need to interrogate him about escrow. Brianna, Marin snaps, her voice rising to a shrill, defensive pitch. We have access to all the capital we need. Mom and Dad made sure of it. My mother visibly pales. Marin, she whispers sharply, but Marin is too angry to stop. She wants to see me bleed. Mom and Dad put their faith in us. They knew we needed a quick bridge loan to cover the vendor expansion. They used your old business profile and your credit history to guarantee a revolving capital line for Marin House. We needed a clean guarantor. And let us be honest, you were never going to use your name for anything big anyway. You should be honored that your stagnant little life is finally contributing to something important. The air in the Oraline room seems to freeze. The clinking of silverware from the surrounding tables fades into absolute silence. My father drops his gaze to his plate, his face flushing a deep, mottled red. My mother looks terrified. Luke closes his eyes, realizing instantly that his wife has just confessed to multiple counts of federal wire fraud in the middle of a crowded restaurant. Marin sits back, crossing her arms, a triumphant smirk plastered on her face, completely oblivious to the fact that she just handed me the very weapon I came here to collect. I do not gasp. I do not shout. I look directly into my sister's eyes, watching the arrogant fire burning inside them, a blaze fed by the very fuel she supplied herself. She thinks she has just delivered the ultimate insult, proving that my identity is so worthless they can just harvest it for their own gain. She has no idea that she just confessed to a felony. I take a slow, deliberate sip of my sparkling water. The ice clinks softly against the glass. The first landmine has officially detonated. Let them burn. I place my glass of sparkling water gently onto the white linen tablecloth. The faint click of the crystal base settling against the table sounds obscenely loud in the sudden, breathless quiet of the Oraline room. The ambient jazz music playing from the concealed speakers overhead seems to fade into a dull, meaningless hum. I look directly at my sister, whose triumphant smirk has completely vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of profound confusion. She looked like a child who had just touched a hot stove. What you are casually referring to as using household credibility. Marin, I say, my voice dropping to a register so calm and precise it borders on clinical, is defined under the Federal Penal Code as commercial guarantee forgery and financial identity theft. The words hang in the chilled air of the dining room. My father's heavy silver fork slips from his fingers, clattering aggressively against his porcelain plate. My mother visibly recoils, her hand flying up to cover her mouth as if she can physically push the words back into the ether. But it is Luke who reacts with the predictable, panicked energy of a cornered animal. The faux aristocratic boredom he was projecting just 5 minutes ago evaporates entirely. He leans forward, his chest puffing out in a desperate attempt to physically dominate the space, his hands raised in a placating, defensive gesture. Now hold on, Brianna, Luke said, forcing a strained laugh that died in his throat. Nobody stole anything. We are family. It was just a temporary fix to help with cash flow until the business caught up. You are making it sound worse than it is. He is throwing every empty corporate syllable he can remember at the wall, praying something sticks. He is trying to construct a maze of jargon to hide the very simple, very ugly truth. Implicit family consent does not exist on a sworn commercial lending application. Luke, I reply, slicing through his babble with absolute precision. And you do not optimize someone else's legal identity. You steal it. I do not raise my voice, but the temperature at the table seems to plummet. I keep my eyes locked onto his, refusing to let him look away. You see, I did not find out about your little optimization project because I was snooping, I continue, leaning forward just a fraction of an inch. Exactly 4 weeks ago, my company, Signal Arc, was in the final stages of purchasing a new commercial warehouse to expand our physical records department. It was a standard, multi-million-dollar transaction. I had the capital. I had the clearance, but at the very last minute, the underwriting bank froze the entire acquisition. They flagged my personal corporate profile. The lending officer informed me that my debt-to-income ratio was suddenly catastrophic because the national credit system showed I was listed as the primary, unconditional guarantor on a massive, highly leveraged, and completely undeclared commercial loan. Marin stares at me, her eyes wide, the color rapidly draining from her perfectly contoured cheeks. She is beginning to understand that the insulated, consequence-free bubble she has lived in for her entire life is currently rupturing. Most people would have panicked, I tell them, my tone remaining entirely conversational, as if we are discussing the weather rather than federal felonies. Most people would have immediately called the bank, screamed fraud, and filed a police report that very afternoon. I did not do that. I did not call the authorities right away. And I certainly did not call you. Instead, I spent the last 28 days quietly and methodically pulling the threads. I watch a bead of sweat materialize right at the edge of Luke's hairline. I deployed my forensic accounting team, I say, laying out the invisible noose I've spent the last month weaving. We traced the electronic signatures on the loan application back to a residential internet protocol address in the northern suburbs, specifically, your home address, Luke. We found the originating email account that sent the finalized contract to the escrow officer. We mapped out the entire sloppy chain of fabricated verifications you used to push the paperwork through the automated underwriting system. I pause, letting the crushing weight of the surveillance settle over him. I want him to know that there is not a single keystroke he made in the dark that I have not illuminated. So, I have a few very specific questions, I say, my voice sharp and demanding. Who managed to guess the security password to my old collegiate email address? Who bypassed the two-step verification process? And most importantly, who submitted the fraudulent state paperwork to unseal and reopen my old limited liability company, an entity I legally dissolved exactly 7 years ago? The table is paralyzed. Luke opens his mouth to speak, to offer another pathetic defense, but his vocal cords seem to have failed him. He is suffocating under the weight of his own amateur arrogance. Seeing her golden son-in-law drowning, my mother panics. Her maternal instinct to protect the illusion of her perfect family overrides any basic sense of self-preservation or legal logic. Brianna, please stop this right now, Sherry stammers, her hands fluttering nervously in the air, her voice trembling with misplaced indignation. You are making this sound so sinister and cruel. Luke was just trying to help your sister. The vendor paperwork for the vow renewal and the business expansion was so overwhelming. Marin was so stressed out. Luke just helped fill out the forms to make it less messy for everyone. He did all the typing because he is so good with the computer. It was just administrative help. I slowly turn my head to look at my mother. The sheer, blinding ignorance of her statement is almost beautiful in its tragic perfection. Thank you, Mother, I say quietly. You just confirmed in front of multiple witnesses that he directly manipulated a binding legal document and executed a financial contract without holding a power of attorney or any form of legal authorization. Sherry blinks, her mouth snapping shut as the reality of what she just admitted crashes into her. She looks at Dale for support, but my father is staring at his plate, his face a mask of horrified realization. He is a businessman. He knows exactly what unauthorized execution of a commercial guarantee means. But the forgery is only half the problem, I say, shifting my attention back to Luke. He has stopped trying to posture. He is shrinking into the velvet upholstery, the fabric of his expensive suit looking suddenly too large for him. Commercial loans of that size, especially revolving lines of credit designed for rapid scaling, come with strict, non-negotiable financial covenants. The lender requires absolute proof of historical revenue to justify the risk. I let the silence hang for a moment, letting the financial terminology act as a scalpel. If the actual, verifiable cash flow of Marin House weddings is even $1 lower than the inflated, fictional projections you submitted to the underwriter to secure the funds, I explain, speaking slowly so he absorbs every single syllable, then that loan breached its primary condition on the exact day the funds were disbursed. That elevates this situation from a simple case of familial identity theft to textbook, premeditated federal bank fraud. And banks do not care about implicit family consent. Luke. They care about their money. Marin lets out a small, strangled gasp. The reality that her empire is built on stolen credit is bad enough, but the realization that her husband has tied her business to a federal crime is finally breaking through her impenetrable wall of narcissism. Just as the devastating gravity of my words settles over the table, a sharp, brief vibration hums against my thigh. I calmly reach into the pocket of my blazer and pull out my phone. The screen illuminates, casting a harsh, artificial glow over the linen tablecloth. A single text message sits on the lock screen, sent from a secure, encrypted number. I am in the lobby. Receiver is with me. I do not type a reply. I simply press the side button, locking the screen and plunging the device back into darkness. I slip the phone back into my pocket and slowly raise my eyes. Luke is staring at me. The arrogant, commanding executive who ordered a $4,000 bottle of wine just 20 minutes ago is entirely gone. His face is pale, his breathing is shallow, and a visible sheen of cold sweat is gathering on his forehead. He looks like a man who has just stepped off a cliff and is waiting for gravity to notice him. I do not smile. I simply pick up my sparkling water, take another deliberate sip, and wait for the elevator doors to open. The heavy brass-handled door of our private dining suite clicks open. The sound is sharp, cutting through the suffocating tension Luke's desperate silence has just created. Everyone turns their heads toward the entrance. Stepping into the room is Rowan Hale. He is not the sort of man who announces his arrival with loud greetings, aggressive posturing, or flashy displays of wealth. He does not wear diamond-studded watches or carry clothes plastered with designer logos. Instead, he wears a perfectly tailored midnight blue suit that speaks of generational, quiet money and absolute, uncompromising authority. His mere presence immediately shifts the barometric pressure of the room, causing the temperature to seemingly drop several degrees. He moves with the fluid, unhurried grace of a man who makes high-stakes corporate decisions for a living. A man entirely comfortable navigating disasters. He walks directly to my side, resting a warm, familiar hand on the back of my velvet chair. He leans down, completely ignoring the staring faces across the table, and presses a brief, grounding kiss against my temple. The crisp scent of cedar and bergamot washes over me, a sharp and welcome contrast to the stale, suffocating smell of Luke's panic. I look across the pristine white tablecloth at Marin. Her perfectly glossed lips are slightly parted, frozen in a silent gasp. She is staring intently at the matte gold band resting on Rowan's left ring finger, and then her eyes dart to the matching, understated band I have quietly worn on my right hand for months, which I have just now shifted back to my left hand. "Everyone," I say, my voice steady, clear, and completely devoid of the dramatic flair they are so accustomed to. "I would like to introduce you to Rowan Hale, my husband of 2 years." I sit back and watch the psychological impact of those words physically strike my sister. It is a visible, visceral blow. The shock radiating from Marin is not simply about Rowan's obvious, undeniable elegance or the aura of absolute control he projects effortlessly. The true, agonizing devastation for Marin is the realization that I am not the tragic, isolated spinster she constructed in her mind to make herself feel superior. I did not spend the last decade weeping alone in a dark apartment over her stolen prize. I built a life, a profoundly solid, deeply secure, and intensely private life. And more importantly, I found my family so utterly irrelevant, so unworthy of my joy, that I did not even bother to inform them I had married. I denied them the opportunity to judge my choices, to attend my ceremony, or to ruin my happiness. That specific omission hurts Marin more than any screamed insult ever could. She thought my life still revolved around her. In that moment, she realized it had not for years. Rowan smoothly pulls up an empty, heavy wooden chair from the corner of the room, positioning himself right beside me. He offers a polite, measured, and terrifyingly calm nod to my parents. "Dale, Sherry," Rowan says, his voice carrying the deep, soothing resonance of a cello, though the melody is entirely devoid of warmth. "It is a pleasure to finally meet you, though the circumstances bringing us together tonight are quite unfortunate." He does not extend his hand for them to shake. He then turns his penetrating gaze to Luke, who is currently practically hyperventilating into his empty crystal wine glass. From the inner breast pocket of his suit jacket, Rowan produces a thin, unmarked manila envelope. He places it gently, deliberately onto the center of the table. The soft sound of the paper touching the linen feels deafening in the quiet room. "I want to make one thing perfectly clear from the outset," Rowan begins, interlacing his fingers and resting them on the table. "I am not here to participate in a domestic grievance. I am a senior partner at North Ledger Partners. We specialize in distressed asset recovery and the forensic restructuring of fractured commercial acquisitions. My firm was recently retained by a major banking institution to audit a highly toxic portfolio of defaulted commercial debt. During the primary discovery phase, my team flagged a severely falsified vendor guarantee dossier. That specific dossier illegally utilized my wife's legal identity and credit profile as a fraudulent shield." Rowan pauses, letting the heavy, undeniable legal terminology settle over the table like a suffocating blanket. He looks at Luke not with anger, but with the cold, clinical assessment of a seasoned predator examining a particularly foolish prey. "You were speaking quite loudly earlier of your imminent ascension at Alderaan Hospitality Collective. Luke," Rowan continues, his tone polite but lethal, "it is a fascinating narrative you have constructed for your family. However, it is entirely fictional. You are not stepping into the role of Chief Growth Officer. As of exactly 9 o'clock yesterday morning, you were placed on an indefinite, unpaid administrative suspension pending a full federal compliance review." Luke's face flushes a dangerous, mottled purple. The veins in his neck bulge against his tight silk collar. "That is an absolute lie," Luke spits out, his voice cracking violently as he tries to maintain his alpha male facade. "Who the hell do you think you are? You walk in here, making up garbage because you are threatened by my success. Alderaan is restructuring their entire executive tier, and I am at the very top of the shortlist. You do not know a single thing about my corporate trajectory or my deals." Rowan does not interrupt the pathetic outburst. He simply waits patiently for Luke to run out of breath, his expression utterly unchanged. "Your direct reporting manager, David Sterling, would firmly disagree with your optimistic assessment," Rowan states, delivering the facts with the precision of a scalpel. "Mr. Sterling was the one who initiated the internal forensic audit on Project Vanguard. He is the executive who discovered the severe, undeniable discrepancies in your quarterly revenue reports, alongside the completely fabricated partner files you submitted to the executive board to hide your failing margins. As a result, your corporate security clearance was permanently revoked. Your keycard access to the building was electronically disabled at exactly 4:15 in the afternoon last Thursday. You currently do not even have authorization to enter the employee parking garage, let alone the executive boardroom." The absolute granular precision of Rowan's data completely shatters Luke's remaining bravado. He shrinks back into the velvet booth, his eyes darting frantically around the room, desperately looking for an exit or an excuse that simply does not exist. My father, clinging stubbornly to the decaying illusion of his chosen successful son-in-law, tries to intervene. Dale cannot accept that his judgment was this catastrophically wrong. "Now, wait just a minute here," Dale says, his voice shaking with a messy mixture of fear and foolish pride. "Corporate politics are vicious, especially at that level. I have been in business a long time. I have seen this 100 times before. People get jealous of young, rising talent. The older executives are just trying to push Luke out so they can steal his proprietary operational strategies and take the credit. He is obviously just a victim of a corporate witch hunt." Rowan slowly turns his head to look directly at my father. The expression in Rowan's eyes is one of profound, withering pity, the kind of look one gives a man who is still denying the obvious even as the evidence closes in around him. If this is simply a matter of routine corporate jealousy, Dale, and not systemic, panic-driven financial fraud, Rowan asks gently, his voice barely above a whisper, then perhaps you can explain why the primary payment processing firm for Marin House Weddings initiated a total non-negotiable freeze on all of their merchant accounts at exactly 3 o'clock this afternoon. Marin lets out a sharp, strangled gasp, her hands flying to her throat as if she is physically choking. She frantically digs into her designer evening bag and pulls out her phone. Her manicured fingers tremble violently as she hurriedly opens her business banking application, the facial recognition failing twice because her expression is so distorted by terror. The glowing screen reflects in her wide, panicked eyes. I do not need to lean over and see the screen to know exactly what it says. It will be a wall of red text, a zero available balance, a catastrophic administrative hold. Her fake empire has just officially run out of oxygen. In a final, agonizingly pathetic attempt to assert some semblance of dominance over a room that has completely slipped from his grasp, Luke aggressively snaps his fingers in the air. "Manager," Luke barks, his voice trembling and thin. He reaches into his jacket pocket, pulling out a heavy metal black credit card. He tosses it onto the table with a loud, aggressive clatter. "We are entirely done here. Put the entire dinner, the reserve wine, everything, on this card immediately." We sit in suffocating silence for 3 agonizing minutes. The jazz music overhead continues to play its cheerful, oblivious tune. Finally, the heavy doors of the private room open again. It is not our regular waiter who returns. It is the general manager of the hotel's restaurant. He looks deeply uncomfortable, his posture rigid as he holds a small black leather presenter. He walks briskly to Luke's side of the table, intentionally avoiding eye contact with the rest of us. He opens the folder, revealing the metal black card resting uselessly inside. "I sincerely apologize for the interruption, sir," the manager murmurs, his voice tight with professional embarrassment, leaning in slightly. "We have tried running this card through multiple separate terminals just to be absolutely certain. Your financial institution has firmly declined the transaction." The restaurant manager silently collects the leather presenter and retreats, taking the useless piece of black metal with him. The heavy mahogany door clicks shut. Luke stares at the empty space on the pristine table as if a ghost has just passed through it. "It is a minor banking error," Luke stammers, his voice thin and entirely devoid of its usual arrogant resonance. "The fraud department probably flagged the large wine purchase because we are out celebrating. I will call my private wealth manager in the morning to clear it up." "There is no wealth manager to call, Luke," Rowan says smoothly, leaning back in his chair with an air of absolute authority. "And it is not a temporary fraud hold. The accounts tied to Marin House Weddings are locked because the business is functionally insolvent. Your wife's company is not an expanding empire preparing for a regional takeover. It is a catastrophic liability currently suffocating under a mountain of credit card chargebacks, breached vendor contracts, unrefunded client deposits, and independent contractors actively threatening to file criminal complaints." I lean forward, picking up the forensic thread precisely where my husband left off. I want to look Luke directly in the eyes as I dismantle his entire existence. "You got desperate, Luke," I say, my voice steady and cold. "You used your temporary executive access at Alderaan to erect a sophisticated network of shell vendors. You created fake catering companies, phantom floral designers, and non-existent logistical teams on paper. When unsuspecting brides handed over $50,000 deposits for their luxury destination weddings, that money did not go into a secure escrow account like you promised them. You pushed those funds through your intermediary limited liability companies and funneled the cash directly into high-risk options trading accounts." Luke's jaw drops. His eyes widen in sheer terror as he realizes we have not just looked at the surface. We have scraped the very bottom of his fraudulent ledger. "You were day trading with client money to recoup your own massive personal market losses," I continue, letting the truth hit him like a physical blow. And when those highly volatile bets blew up in your face, you had zero cash left to pay the actual, legitimate vendors who were supposed to execute the weddings. My father suddenly looks physically ill. His complexion turns a pale, ashen gray as he drops his fork onto his plate. "The capital we guaranteed," Dale whispers, his voice trembling as the horrifying reality finally pieces itself together in his mind. "The bridge loan we took out using Brianna's corporate profile to secure the future of Marin House. Where exactly did that money go?" "It never touched Marin's business expansion, Dad," I tell him, locking eyes with the man who always thought I was the failure of the family. "That money went directly into covering Luke's catastrophic margin calls. It was a desperate patch job used to pay off the furious vendors from last quarter who were threatening to take their story to the local news stations. You did not invest in a legacy. You funded a Ponzi scheme to keep your son-in-law out of federal prison." "No, that is absolutely not true," Marin suddenly shrills, her voice cracking with hysterical denial. She slams her manicured hands down on the table, rattling the fine silver. "You are just jealous. Brianna, you have always been bitter and jealous. We are booked solid for the next 2 years. Look at my social media presence. I have hundreds of thousands of followers. You cannot fake that kind of influence. The Italian villas, the private fittings, the destination shoots. It is all completely real." I look at her with absolute, freezing calm. "Social media followers do not pay the mortgage. Marin, they do not cover payroll. And you absolutely can fake it. Those lavish estates you post on your feed every week, you rent them by the hour using a peer-to-peer application. The custom couture gowns you claim to design in-house, you borrow them from struggling local boutiques in exchange for social media exposure. The private jet interiors, sets housed in a cheap warehouse across town. Your entire public identity is held together by rented props and unpaid interns." Rowan reaches into the manila envelope still resting quietly on the table. He slowly extracts a thick, formally stapled legal document and slides it across the linen toward my father. "This is a finalized civil litigation summary," Rowan explains, his tone remaining rigorously professional and devoid of pity. "It was filed in the state civil court yesterday afternoon. It is a class action lawsuit spearheaded by 14 separate brides. They are suing Marin House weddings for lost deposits, deliberately delayed ceremonies, and being defrauded into purchasing ultra-premium packages that never actually existed in the first place." For the very first time in my entire life, I see genuine, unfiltered rage erupt across my father's face. He turns slowly toward Luke. Dale does not look at his golden boy with admiration anymore. He looks at him like a man who has just found a parasite attached to his leg. "You stole from us," Dale hisses, his fists clenching so hard his knuckles turn white. "You used my daughter's name to steal from this family, and you ruined my other daughter's reputation to cover your reckless gambling habits, but my mother cannot accept the collapse. Her entire social standing, her entire identity among her wealthy country club friends, relies completely on the fiction of Marin's perfection." She reaches out and grabs Dale's arm, her fingers digging desperately into his tailored suit jacket. "Dale, please, do not shout," Sherry begs, her eyes wide with a manic, delusional kind of hope. "It is just a misunderstanding. Every single business goes through a temporary rough patch. The economy is difficult right now for entrepreneurs. Marin and Luke are smart. They can fix this. They just need a little more time to restructure the accounts and pay everyone back." Luke realizes the walls are rapidly closing in on him. The threat of federal indictments and the sudden, terrifying withdrawal of my father's financial protection strips away his final layer of loyalty. Like any true coward backed into a corner, he immediately turns on the closest target. "Fix this," Luke shouts, his voice cracking violently as he loses the last shred of his composure. He points a shaking finger directly at his wife. "There is absolutely no fixing this because she refuses to stop spending money we do not have. Do you have any idea what it costs to maintain the image she constantly demands? The designer bags, the leased luxury cars, the constant cosmetic procedures, She wanted the lifestyle of a millionaire chief executive officer, and she wanted it instantly. She forced me to find the money. She drove me to do this. I had to manage the cash flow just to keep her from throwing a massive tantrum every time her credit cards declined at the boutique. Maren looks as though she has been physically slapped across the face. The perfect, heavily curated alliance they have paraded in front of my face for 9 long years shatters into a million jagged pieces right in front of my eyes. "You are blaming me for this," Maren screams back at him, tears of mascara finally breaking loose and streaking down her perfectly contoured cheeks. "You told me you were a financial genius. You told me you had the entire market under control. You are nothing but a fraud." They are viciously tearing each other apart, stripping away the shiny, expensive veneer to reveal the ugly, hollow core of their relationship. It is not a marriage built on love or destiny like my parents always claimed. It is a volatile hostage situation built entirely on mutual delusion and stolen funds. The chaos at the table is deafening, but my mother's voice somehow cuts through it. She does not turn to Maren to comfort her. She does not turn to Luke to condemn his actions. She turns directly to me. Sherry practically lunges across the circular table, knocking over her crystal water glass in the process. The iced water spills across the white linen, soaking into the fabric like a rapidly spreading stain. She grabs my hand with a crushing, desperate grip. Her manicured nails dig sharply into my skin. I look down at her hands holding mine, then up into her panicked eyes. For a fraction of a second, I expect to finally see an ounce of remorse. I expect a tearful apology for abandoning me 9 years ago to blindly support this exact monster sitting across from us. Instead, I see something infinitely worse. "Brianna, please," Sherry whispers frantically, her voice trembling with raw, selfish panic. "You have all this proof. You have these powerful lawyers. But you absolutely cannot let this get out yet. The vow renewal ceremony is this coming Saturday. We have over 200 distinguished guests flying in from out of state. The luxury caterers are booked. The celebrity photographer is paid in full. If this scandal leaks to the press now, the entire family will be utterly humiliated in front of everyone we know in Dallas. I am begging you. Just keep your mouth shut and hold off your legal people until Sunday morning. Just let your sister have her special night. Let us get through the weekend without a public disaster." I did not go back to my hotel room and immediately draft a vindictive manifesto for social media. I did not call the local Dallas Society reporters to leak the civil litigation summary, nor did I send out a mass email to our extended relatives detailing the financial crimes my sister and her husband had committed. Loud, messy revenge is the ultimate refuge of the powerless. It is what people do when they have no actual leverage and are desperate for public validation. True power, the kind that permanently alters landscapes, lies in absolute restraint. I simply went back to my office at Signal Arc Recovery and let the intricate machinery of legal and financial consequence operate at its natural, terrifying speed. I knew with absolute certainty that the truth would be far more agonizing for them when it materialized organically, rather than as a weapon I had explicitly thrown. Over the following 72 hours, the inevitable freefall began. Maren and Luke descended into a frantic, chaotic cycle of damage control. By Wednesday morning, my personal cellular device had become a graveyard of increasingly unhinged voicemails and legally perilous text messages. First came the aggressive posturing from Luke. He left a string of voicemails promising to launch a massive defamation lawsuit against me. He claimed he had an army of elite corporate litigators on retainer who were ready to utterly destroy my firm, insisting that his suspension from Alderaan Hospitality Collective was merely a clerical error that I was maliciously exaggerating. When those empty threats failed to elicit a single response from me, Maren took over the communication strategy. She immediately pivoted to tearful, manipulative begging. She left me an agonizing 12-minute audio message, her voice trembling with manufactured sorrow, talking endlessly about the unbreakable bond of sisterhood. She pleaded with me to remember our childhood, claiming that my sudden cruelty was destroying her delicate mental health. When absolute silence remained my only answer, They abandoned the familial angle entirely and launched a desperate smear campaign. They began frantically calling mutual acquaintances, country club members, and extended family, planting venomous whispers. They claimed that I had suffered a severe psychotic break, that my sudden marriage to Rowan Hale was a complete fabrication designed to intimidate them, and that I was still so obsessively, pathetically jealous over a 9-year-old breakup that I was actively forging federal documents just to ruin Maren's perfect vow renewal ceremony. They thought they were controlling the narrative. They did not realize that while they were busy gossiping, I was busy auditing. Inside the secure, glass-walled conference rooms of North Ledger Partners, Rowan and I formally merged our operational resources. My forensic accounting team at Signal Arc Recovery began conducting official, recorded interviews to build an impenetrable wall of evidence. The dam of silence had finally broken. Former employees of Maren House Weddings, young assistants who had been terrified into submission, came forward in droves. They painted a bleak, horrifying picture of a deeply toxic corporate environment built entirely on bounced payroll checks, verbal abuse, and illegal non-disclosure agreements. We meticulously cataloged testimonies from dozens of independent contractors. We recorded statements from a premium floral supplier who had been strung along for 6 agonizing months with empty promises of incoming international wire transfers that never actually existed. We interviewed boutique owners who had their custom inventory essentially held hostage by Maren, threatened with social media ruin if they dared to demand their legally contracted payments. Out in the real world, the financial arteries of Maren House Weddings were being systematically severed. Following the initial freeze of their primary merchant accounts, their secondary payment gateways and emergency revolving credit lines were flagged and locked down by risk management algorithms one by one. The luxury event industry in Dallas is an incredibly small, interconnected ecosystem. Rumors of their catastrophic insolvency spread like a digital wildfire. By Thursday afternoon, the primary vendors contracted for their highly publicized Saturday vow renewal gala began pulling the plug. The elite catering company owed roughly $25,000 in arrears from 3 previous events, sent a formal legal notice demanding cash in hand by Friday morning, or they would refuse to deliver a single appetizer. The lighting technicians and audio engineers outright refused to unload their equipment trucks at the venue without a certified, upfront cashier's check. Then, the emails started arriving in my secure corporate inbox. They did not come from my family members or Dallas socialites concerned about the drama. They came from absolute strangers. I received a frantic, heartbreaking message from a young bride in Austin who had wired $40,000 to Maren House, only to discover 3 weeks before her wedding that her venue had never actually been booked. I read a devastating email from a single mother who had taken out a predatory, high-interest personal loan to pay for her daughter's dream destination wedding, only to be left with worthless email assurances, 0 booked flights, and no photographer. Reading those desperate messages shifted the gravity of the entire situation for me. This was no longer just a petty familial dispute or a long overdue reckoning for my broken engagement. This was a sprawling, systemic exploitation of vulnerable women. On Friday morning, exactly 24 hours before the gala, my executive assistant buzzed my office line to inform me that Dale and Sherry Cook were sitting in the reception lobby, aggressively demanding 15 minutes of my time. They did not bring Maren with them. They did not bring Luke. They came entirely alone. I had security escort them into my secondary, sterile meeting room. They looked physically exhausted, the glossy, impenetrable veneer of their upper-class lifestyle visibly cracking around the edges. They did not come to my office to offer a genuine apology for 9 years of emotional neglect. They came to negotiate a surrender that would protect their own social standing. "Brianna," my father started, his voice heavy, deliberately refusing to meet my eyes as he sat across the mahogany table. "Your mother and I have reviewed the litigation summary you left at the restaurant. We understand the severe gravity of what Luke has done, but you have to understand the collateral damage here. If this goes public tomorrow, it will completely ruin us all in Dallas. The humiliation will be permanent." My mother leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly together, offering a sickly sweet, entirely transactional smile that made my stomach turn. "We want to make things right with you, sweetheart," Sherry pleaded, her voice dripping with calculated desperation. "We will publicly acknowledge your firm at the country club. We will tell everyone in our circle how incredibly successful you have become. We will finally give you the open recognition and respect you have always deserved in this family. All you have to do is sign a formal withdrawal of your fraud claim and instruct Rowan to quietly suspend the asset recovery process until Monday morning. Just let your sister get through her ceremony tomorrow night. Give us the weekend to save face." I looked directly at the two people who had raised me, the people who had watched me lose everything and blamed me for the privilege, and I felt absolutely nothing. There was no lingering anger, no profound sorrow, just a cold, clinical clarity. They had not experienced a sudden, miraculous moral awakening. They had not realized the profound depth of their cruelty toward me. They were simply attempting to switch their allegiance because the power dynamic had violently reversed. I was no longer the inconvenient, boring daughter they could ignore. I was the active threat they desperately needed to neutralize. "You cannot trade public recognition for a federal felony." "Mother," I said, my voice completely devoid of any measurable emotion. "And you cannot negotiate with gravity once you have already thrown yourself off the roof of the building." I stood up from my leather chair, signaling the absolute end of the negotiation. "I am not withdrawing my name from the fraud claim, and I am not ordering my husband to stop the legal audits," I told them, my tone carrying the heavy finality of a judge delivering a sentence. My mother gasped, tears of genuine, selfish panic welling in her eyes. "Then you are deliberately going to destroy your own sister on the most important night of her entire life. Are you really that cold and cruel? Brianna." I walked over to the heavy glass door and pulled it open, gesturing for them to leave. "I am not destroying anything," I replied softly, looking at their horrified faces. "I am simply refusing to continue propping up the scaffolding of her lies." Before they stepped out into the hallway, I offered them one final piece of information. "Tell Marin I received her beautiful, gold-embossed invitation," I said, allowing a tiny, razor-sharp sliver of ice to enter my voice. "And please tell her that I will absolutely be attending the vow renewal tomorrow evening. I would not miss it for the world." I did not accept the invitation because I wanted to wage a public war or scream at them in front of their wealthy friends. I accepted it because I knew the venue itself was a ticking time bomb. I was going exactly where they invited me. I was going to walk into that grand hall, take my assigned seat at the singles table, and quietly witness the final, spectacular collapse of the stage they had spent 9 years building, right before my very eyes. On Friday afternoon, just 24 hours before the grand event was scheduled to begin, Luke attempted his final, desperate maneuver. He bypassed my receptionist by waiting in the underground parking garage of the Signal Arc Recovery Building, ambushing me as I walked toward my car. The polished, arrogant executive I had seen at the Auraline Room earlier in the week was completely gone. His designer suit was wrinkled, his tie was missing, and his eyes were bloodshot from consecutive nights of frantic, sleepless panic. He stepped out from behind a concrete pillar, physically blocking my path to my vehicle. "You think you have entirely cornered me, Brianna," Luke sneered, his voice echoing sharply against the concrete walls of the garage. "You think you can just hand over a tidy little package of financial records to the authorities and walk away with your hands completely clean. But if you push this all the way to a federal indictment, I am not going down by myself. I will take you right down to the bottom with me." I did not step back. I did not reach for my phone to call security. I simply stood my ground, clutching my leather briefcase, waiting for him to play the last, pathetic card he held in his hand. "I still have the original hard drives," Luke continued, a malicious, triumphant grin spreading across his exhausted face. "I have every single foundational business plan, every vendor matrix spreadsheet, and every initial financial projection you meticulously built for me 9 years ago. If the commercial fraud unit starts asking questions about who designed the architecture of these fake vendor accounts, I will simply show them the digital blueprints you created. I will tell the investigators that you were the mastermind behind the entire supply chain structure, and that I was just following the corporate design my brilliant, financially savvy fiancé set up for me. You will be universally branded as my primary co-conspirator. He was trying to leverage the very labor I had freely given him when I loved him into a weapon of mutually assured destruction. It was a classic, textbook abuser tactic, but Luke had fundamentally miscalculated the depth of my preparation. You are referring to the basic operational spreadsheets I drafted for you more than 8 years ago, I replied, my voice calm in the damp air of the garage. The documents I created when we shared an apartment, long before you decided to publicly humiliate me and steal my sister. It does not matter when you wrote them, Luke snapped, taking a step closer. Your digital fingerprints are all over the foundational architecture of the business. The optics alone will completely destroy your precious corporate reputation. I slowly unlatched my briefcase, reached inside, and pulled out a single, heavily redacted sheet of paper. I held it up between us. Optics only matter when they are not instantly dismantled by forensic reality, I stated coldly. I did not avoid my past when I launched my internal audit. Luke, I anticipated that you would eventually try to use my old work against me. What you failed to realize is that I kept continuous, encrypted cloud backups of every single file I ever created on that shared network. Luke stared at the paper in my hand, his confident grin faltering. My security team pulled the comprehensive access logs, I explained, watching the color rapidly drain from his face. We have undeniable, time-stamped proof that you illegally accessed my dormant templates exactly 4 years after I moved out. Furthermore, we recovered the manipulated metadata, showing that you actively retrofitted those old spreadsheets, altering the digital creation dates to make it appear as though the documents had been continuously updated. You did not just forge my signature on a commercial loan. Luke, you actively tampered with digital evidence in a premeditated attempt to frame me for your subsequent financial crimes. His mouth opened, but the aggressive threat he had prepared died completely in his throat. I was not finished. I reached into the briefcase again and pulled out a thicker, bound dossier. But your attempt to frame me is not even the most repulsive part of your contingency plan, I continued, my tone dropping to a register of pure, concentrated disgust. My investigators tracked down your former executive assistant, a young man who was terrified that he was going to be indicted as your accomplice. In exchange for a guarantee of legal immunity from our recovery firm, he provided a full, sworn affidavit regarding your rapid liquidity strategies. Luke took a sudden, staggering step backward, his back hitting the concrete pillar. He knew exactly what the assistant had confessed. He testified, with supporting email documentation, that over the past 18 months, you opened 6 separate high-interest merchant cash advance accounts, I said, driving the final nail into his coffin. And you did not open them under your own name or under your corporate executive profile. You opened every single one of those predatory loans using Marin's personal identification, utilizing forged versions of her digital signature. You systematically designed a financial architecture where, if the entire fraudulent operation ever exploded, your own wife would be the sole individual left holding the bag for millions of dollars in untraceable, unsecured debt. You were planning to offer her up as the ultimate scapegoat to save yourself. I did not wait for his denial. I placed the documents back into my briefcase, snapped it shut, and walked right past him to my car, leaving him suffocating in the dark. I drove straight back to my office. I knew Marin and my mother were still waiting in the reception area, having stubbornly refused to leave the building after our morning confrontation. I instructed my assistant to bring them into my private office. When Marin walked in, she was still wearing the same mask of defensive arrogance, clinging desperately to the belief that I was just a jealous sister trying to ruin her party. I did not speak a single word to her. I simply opened my briefcase, placed the sworn affidavit from Luke's assistant on my desk, and turned it so it faced her. I placed the copies of the 6 fraudulent merchant cash advance contracts right beside it, highlighting the forged signatures bearing her name. "Read them," I commanded quietly. Marin looked down. For a long, agonizing minute, the only sound in the office was the heavy ticking of the wall clock. I watched her perfectly manicured fingers tremble as she slowly turned the pages. I watched her eyes dart back and forth across the legal text, absorbing the catastrophic reality of what her husband had done to her. This was the final, devastating crack. For 9 long years, Marin had genuinely believed she was the victorious queen who had stolen the ultimate prize. She believed she had won the perfect man, the perfect lifestyle, and the perfect revenge against the sister she secretly resented. Sitting in my office, staring at those forged signatures, the golden illusion shattered permanently. She realized she was never a partner in an empire. She was nothing more than a highly decorated human shield, a convenient layer of glossy paint slapped hastily over a massive, decaying financial scam. A single, heavy tear dropped from her chin, splashing onto the legal paper. She collapsed into the leather guest chair, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent, hyperventilating sobs. My mother, witnessing the absolute destruction of her favorite daughter, rushed forward. She wrapped her arms around Marin, glaring at me with a desperate, irrational hatred. "How can you be so cruel as to show her this right now?" Sherry cried out, her voice breaking. "You know how fragile she is right now. You have to help us fix this. Brianna, you have the money and the lawyers to make this disappear." Marin did not know what he was doing. "She is just foolish." "Brianna, she is foolish, but she is not evil. She does not deserve to go to prison." I looked at my mother, marveling at her endless capacity for selective morality. "There is a profound difference between being foolish and being entirely complicit." "Mother," I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of pity. "When you knowingly push someone else off a cliff because you want the view from the top all to yourself, you do not get to claim you are just clumsy when the ground finally collapses underneath your own feet." Marin knew the money was dirty. She just did not care, as long as the cameras were flashing. Before my mother could launch into another hysterical plea, the heavy wooden door of my office opened. Rowan stepped inside. He glanced at Marin, who was still weeping into her hands, and then turned his attention to me. He carried a single, formalized legal notice in his hand. "I apologize for the interruption," Rowan said smoothly, his commanding presence immediately silencing my mother. "But we just received the final confirmation from the commercial real estate division. The primary holding group that owned the massive, defaulted debt on Belmere House has officially executed the sale of that debt." Marin suddenly lifted her head, her mascara completely ruined, her eyes wide with fresh panic. Belmere House was the sprawling Southern-style mansion where her 200-guest vow renewal was scheduled to take place the very next evening. "What does that mean?" Marin whispered, her voice raw and hoarse. "It means," Rowan explained patiently, acting as the neutral bringer of absolute doom, "that the original creditor no longer controls the property. The massive delinquent mortgage has been purchased in its entirety by a new, private investment entity. Because the venue is currently in severe breach of its financial covenants, this new controlling party has the absolute legal authority to seize the property, lock the gates, and cancel any scheduled events at their own discretion, without any prior warning." My mother gasped, clutching her chest. "Who bought it?" she demanded, looking frantically between Rowan and me. "Who bought the debt? We can call them. We can offer them a premium to just keep the doors open for 24 more hours. Who is the new owner?" I looked at my sister, whose entire fake universe was now hanging by a single, microscopic thread. I knew exactly who the new controlling party was, but I had absolutely no intention of giving them the comfort of that information. "It does not matter who bought it," I told them. Picking up my briefcase and preparing to leave the office for the weekend, I looked directly into Marin's terrified, tear-stained eyes. "Do not cancel the caterers. Do not send out an emergency cancellation email to your 200 distinguished guests," I instructed her softly, offering a smile devoid of warmth. "Go home. Put on your expensive white dress. Walk into Belmere House tomorrow night and host your perfectly fabricated vow renewal. Some lies only collapse once everyone is there to see them. The air surrounding Belmere House on Saturday evening was thick with the suffocating humidity typical of a southern summer, though the oppressive atmosphere had less to do with the weather and entirely to do with the magnificent, decaying lie taking place on its sprawling lawns. The venue was a brilliantly restored antebellum mansion, featuring towering white columns and sweeping verandas. Maren had spent the last 18 months aggressively marketing this exact property as the crown jewel of her expanding empire, the beating heart of her newly rebranded luxury lifestyle company. Tonight, it was supposed to be her ultimate stage. The guest list was a meticulously curated audience of enablers and marks. The manicured gardens were swarming with local social media influencers, holding up their phones to capture the perfect lighting. Wealthy former clients flaunting their jewelry, a handful of retail investors Luke had successfully conned, and the core group of my parents' elite country club friends. They were all sipping champagne, completely captivated by the gilded shell my family had spent 9 years constructing. Through the massive French doors of the grand ballroom, I spotted my sister. Maren was draped in a breathtaking, custom ivory couture gown that must have cost tens of thousands of dollars she absolutely did not have. From a distance, she looked like the triumphant bride she so desperately wanted to be. But as we moved closer, the illusion fractured. Beneath the heavy layers of professional makeup, the deep, bruised shadows under her eyes were glaringly obvious. She carried the rigid, terrified posture of a woman who had not slept in 3 days. Beside her stood Luke, squeezed into a flawlessly tailored black tuxedo. He was not greeting the guests or playing the charming host. Instead, he was aggressively pacing near the grand staircase, his head bowed as he frantically tapped the screen of his cellular phone, his jaw clenched tight as every single digital payment application he tried to access returned a catastrophic error code. Rowan and I timed our arrival perfectly. We walked through the heavy oak doors just past 8 o'clock in the evening, intentionally arriving late enough to avoid the initial receiving line, but early enough to witness the structural collapse. I did not dress to compete with Maren's bridal extravagance. I wore a simple, floor-length silk gown in a deep, muted sapphire, paired with minimal jewelry. I did not need diamonds to command the room. The quiet, absolute certainty radiating from my husband and me was far more intimidating than any luxury brand. When Maren finally caught sight of us standing near the arched entryway, a visible tremor ran through her delicate frame. My profound calmness, the total absence of anger or vindictiveness in my expression, only amplified her spiraling panic. She knew I was not there to cause a scene. I was there as a witness. The beautiful facade was already bleeding out from a dozen different wounds. Outside the towering wrought iron gates of the estate, a secondary, uninvited crowd was rapidly forming. Security guards were frantically trying to hold back a group of furious, unpaid independent contractors. I could see the owner of a premium rental company waving a stack of breached contracts through the iron bars. Even worse, word had spread quickly through the local bridal forums about the sudden financial freeze on Maren House weddings. Mixed among the angry vendors were several young women, the very brides who had lost their massive $50,000 deposits. They stood on the sidewalk, glaring at the glittering mansion, a living testament to my sister's fraudulent empire. Inside the grand hall, the chaos was quieter but far more humiliating. In the corner of the ballroom, the 12-piece jazz ensemble sat rigidly in their chairs, their brass instruments resting entirely silent on their laps. The bandleader was engaged in a heated, hushed argument with Maren's terrified wedding coordinator, flatly refusing to play a single note until the remaining 80% of their performance fee was successfully wired into their account. The visual aesthetics were equally compromised. The towering, elaborate floral archway that was supposed to frame the altar stood completely bare in the center. The elite design team had arrived that morning, discovered their previous checks had bounced, and immediately packed up the imported orchids and roses, leaving behind only the naked, ugly wire framing. Even the open bar, The primary lubricant for my parents' wealthy friends had ground to a humiliating halt. The sophisticated digital merchant system had been completely suspended. Bartenders stood awkwardly behind the marble counter, repeatedly swiping black credit cards and staring helplessly at the glowing red screens indicating that the entire processing account had been permanently locked by the federal risk management authorities. The guests were beginning to notice. The joyful, celebratory chatter was slowly morphing into a collective, confused whisper. Before Rowan and I could move toward the seating area, Dale and Sherry intercepted us. My parents rushed out from behind a towering marble pillar, their faces pale and slick with panicked sweat. My father grabbed my elbow with a desperate, bruising grip and physically dragged me into an empty, dimly lit hallway adjacent to the main ballroom. "Brianna, you have to do something right now," Dale pleaded, his voice cracking with an unrecognizable, pathetic terror. He pointed a shaking finger toward the main hall. "The vendors are threatening to walk out. The bar is shut down. People are starting to ask questions. You have to go out there." My mother stepped into my personal space, tears ruining her expensive mascara. She reached out and grabbed both of my hands. "Please, sweetheart," Sherry begged, her voice taking on a sickeningly sweet, manipulative tone that made my stomach churn. "You know how these corporate things work. You are our smart, capable daughter. You know how to talk to these financial people. Just step up to the microphone, take charge, and tell everyone that this is all just a temporary accounting misunderstanding. Tell them your firm is handling a minor banking glitch and everything is perfectly fine. Just lie for us, Brianna. Just for tonight." I stared at the woman who had spent my entire life telling me I was too cold, too difficult to love, and utterly inadequate compared to my charming sister. Hearing her finally call me her capable daughter in this exact moment, simply because she needed me to commit perjury to save her social standing, did not feel like a victory. It felt absolutely revolting. "I am not stepping up to any microphone." "Mother," I replied softly, carefully peeling her manicured fingers off my hands. "And I am certainly not going to stand in front of 200 people and legitimize a federal crime. You wanted a front row seat to Marin's perfect life. I suggest you go back in there and sit down." I turned my back on them and walked out of the shadowy hallway, rejoining Rowan near the back of the ballroom. The tension in the room had reached a suffocating peak. Marin, sensing that the entire event was about to implode into a spectacular riot, made a frantic, desperate decision. She signaled the remaining string quartet, who had been paid a tiny cash deposit, to start playing the processional march. She grabbed Luke's sweaty hand, her manicured nails digging deep into his skin. She practically dragged him toward the center of the room, forcing a wide, terrifyingly rigid smile onto her face. The officiant, looking deeply uncomfortable, stepped up to the bare wire archway. Marin was going to force the illusion into reality through sheer, delusional willpower. She took her first step down the aisle, her eyes fixed firmly straight ahead, aggressively ignoring the whispering crowd, the silent jazz band, and the empty bar. She made it exactly 5 steps. Suddenly, a brilliant flash of red and blue lights swept violently across the massive stained glass windows of the ballroom. The heavy syncopated crunch of thick tires tearing across the pristine gravel driveway echoed loudly, cutting completely through the thin music of the string quartet. The heavy oak doors at the grand entrance swung open with a violent crash. The evening breeze swept into the room, carrying the sound of the angry crowd outside. But the crowd was no longer blocking the gates. They had been pushed aside. 2 massive black sports utility vehicles had parked diagonally across the front entrance, their hazard lights blinking in rhythmic, undeniable authority. Stepping out of the vehicles were 4 uniformed officers from the County Civil Enforcement Office. Right behind them walked 2 men in sharp, austere business suits, their expressions carved from stone. In their hands, they carried thick, heavily sealed manila envelopes bearing the unmistakable red stamps of the state Supreme Court. The vow renewal was officially over before a single word had been spoken. The music died completely. The string quartet lowered their bows in confusion as the men in sharp business suits bypassed the paralyzed event coordinator and walked directly toward the center of the grand ballroom. The lead representative, a tall man with a voice that projected effortlessly over the 200 stunned guests, held up the heavy, formally sealed manila envelope. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the abrupt interruption," he announced, his tone entirely devoid of emotion. "I am the legally appointed receiver for this commercial property. As of 5 o'clock yesterday afternoon, Belmere House has been placed under immediate foreclosure and physical seizure due to severe, uncured defaults on its primary mezzanine debt. This venue is now under new legal control, and this unauthorized event must cease immediately. I am asking everyone to calmly gather their belongings and vacate the premises." The luxurious, high society gala instantly transformed into a spectacular scene of collapsing prestige. Influencers lowered their cameras in shock, while wealthy socialites gasped and began whispering fiercely behind their hands. Luke violently broke away from Marin's side. His face was a mask of cornered fury. "This is a targeted setup," Luke bellowed, pointing a shaking finger at the receiver, then wildly scanning the crowd until his eyes locked onto me. "This is personal sabotage. You have absolutely no right to step onto this property." He did not get the chance to finish his tantrum. The 4 uniformed officers from the county civil enforcement office parted, allowing 2 detectives from the commercial crimes task unit to step forward. They did not look impressed by his custom tuxedo. "Luke Mercer," the lead detective said, stepping smoothly into Luke's personal space and pulling out a folded piece of paper from his jacket. "We have a court-issued warrant for the immediate seizure of all your personal and corporate electronic devices. Furthermore, we are taking you into custody for formal questioning regarding multiple counts of wire fraud, the intentional misdirection of commercial cash flows, and aggravated identity theft. Place your hands where I can see them." The absolute silence in the ballroom was deafening as they systematically patted Luke down, extracting his cellular phone and his wallet. He did not fight them. The arrogant executive completely deflated, his shoulders slumping as they escorted him toward the glowing red and blue lights waiting in the driveway. Marin stood frozen at the altar, clutching her expensive couture gown as if it could somehow protect her from the nightmare unfolding around her. An investigator approached her, holding a secondary file folder. He did not arrest her, but what he handed her was arguably worse than handcuffs. "Mrs. Mercer, we will need you to come down to the station voluntarily on Monday morning," the investigator said softly, handing her the thick stack of papers. "These are copies of the short-term capital advance contracts your husband executed. You need to review them with your own legal counsel." Marin stared blindly at the papers. In front of her 200 distinguished guests, the devastating reality finally anchored itself in her mind. She saw the forged signatures bearing her own name, the millions of dollars in untraceable debt tied directly to her Social Security number. The truth crashed over her in a suffocating wave. She had never been the victorious queen. She had never won a prize 9 years ago. She was simply the most convenient mark, a beautifully decorated, gold-plated victim perfectly positioned to take the ultimate fall for a monster. Her knees buckled, and she sank onto the cold marble floor, her expensive white dress pooling around her like a surrendered flag. All around us, the guests were no longer whispering. They had pulled out their cellular phones, recording the catastrophic downfall of the Cook family's golden couple. My parents, entirely stripped of their pride and their meticulously crafted social armor, desperately searched the crowd until they found me standing quietly near the back. Dale and Sherry practically stumbled across the marble floor. They completely ignored Marin, who was weeping quietly at the altar. They pushed through their judgmental country club friends and collapsed directly in front of me. To the absolute horror of everyone watching, my parents dropped to their knees. "Brianna, please," my father choked out, his voice cracking with a raw, ugly desperation as he reached for the hem of my silk gown. "You have the resources. You know the people handling this. Save us. Save the family just this one single time. We will completely cut Marin off if that is what you want. We will rewrite the wills. We will fix everything. We are so sorry. My mother nodded frantically, her face streaked with black makeup. We will do whatever you say. Brianna, just make them stop the cameras. Just make the police bring Luke back. I looked down at the two people who had willingly sacrificed me to maintain a beautiful lie. I did not scream at them. I did not cry. I did not need to say a single cruel word. I cannot save you, Dad, I replied, my voice steady over the murmurs of the crowd. And I am not the one who took everything away from you. This family was destroyed the moment you chose pride over the truth. Rowan stepped forward, gently placing himself between my kneeling parents and me. He looked at Dale and Sherry with a profound, freezing calm. You seem confused about who actually orchestrated the seizure of this property, Rowan stated, his rich voice echoing in the silent hall. The primary holding group did not just sell the bad debt on Belmere House to a random corporate entity. The new controlling owner of this entire estate is a private affiliate company wholly controlled by my wife and myself. We finalized the acquisition paperwork exactly 2 days ago. My father gasped, falling backward onto his heels. He realized instantly that I had held the ultimate kill switch the entire evening. But I did not buy the mansion to flaunt my wealth, nor did I intend to flip it for a massive profit. I stepped around my parents and raised my voice just enough to address the lingering guests and the desperate vendors standing near the doors. Belmere House will no longer be operating as a luxury wedding venue, I announced cleanly. Instead, this property will undergo immediate renovations to become Lantern Haven. It will serve as a comprehensive legal and financial support center. We will provide free forensic accounting, legal representation, and debt restructuring for women who have been defrauded of their wedding funds, financially manipulated by abusive partners, or forced into carrying catastrophic debt by their own families. The first clients we will represent, completely free of charge, will be the brides who lost their deposits to Marin House weddings. A sudden, stunned silence fell over the ballroom, followed slowly by a ripple of genuine applause from the unpaid vendors and the young women standing by the entrance. I did not stay to watch my parents weep, nor did I stay to watch Marin get escorted out of her own shattered fairy tale. I simply turned around and walked toward the grand entrance. Rowan placed his hand firmly at the small of my back, guiding me through the heavy oak doors and out into the warm, humid night air. As we walked down the sweeping driveway, away from the flashing lights of the police cruisers and the chaotic noise of the crumbling empire, I took a deep, grounding breath. The heavy, suffocating weight I had carried in my chest for 9 long years simply evaporated into the dark sky. I did not feel the dark, bitter thrill of a villain standing over a pile of ashes. I felt incredibly light. I felt entirely peaceful. The true victory of the night had absolutely nothing to do with Luke going to prison or my sister losing her fake wealth. The real, enduring victory was the profound realization that I was finally free. From this moment forward, I would never again need anyone in that family to tell me that I was good enough. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please leave a comment letting me know where you are listening from so we can connect and share our thoughts. Do not forget to subscribe to the Olivia Revenge Stories channel, like the video, and support me further by pressing the hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.